So AJ, I first want to ask you, talk a little about Dlala Studios. Like, how did this studio come into existence?
I'd never planned to start a studio. Like it was never been on my radar even. I'd kind of started out as a game content developer, like a designer, developer, hybrid role at Jagex. And in my final year there, this guy joined the team called Craig, and for some reason they made me his mentor. And so Craig and I worked together on some features at Jagex, and like we just had a really great kind of working relationship and friendship. And when I left Jagex to join Bossa, I said to Craig, like, look, I know you're happy now, I'm not trying to unsettle you, but if you're unhappy in 6 months, give me a call. About 6 months later, the phone rang, and it was Craig basically saying, like, hey, I think my time here is coming to an end. Do you think there's a role for me at Bossa? So kind of I put in the word for him at Bossa, and he joined Bossa. And once again, we worked together. And for a good 6 months, we were probably like the only two client developers on Monster Mind, the game we worked on at Bossa. That came out. We made that whole game between the team in like 9 months. It was a really kind of tight process. And then ended up winning a BAFTA award for, what was the award called then? It was like, it wasn't even best social. It was like best online, something called the.
What was the game called? Monster what?
Monster Mind. So it was
Mind.
it was a Facebook game. So this was back in Facebook games.
Oh God, yes.
It was the first ever synchronous PvP like competitive Facebook game. And we loved it. It was great. You built a city, of course, because that's what all these games were. But then you could send like B-movie monsters at each other. So you could send like a Godzilla knockoff, a Mothra knockoff. And like the game was really fun, and like we did a really good job of capturing the fun, but not so good a job of capturing the aggressive free-to-play, let's make lots of money side of things. So kind of we did well, our players loved it, it won an award. But like after that, kind of we got a bit unsettled there. I kind of felt like it was my time to move on. Like I hadn't necessarily predicted I was going to do that. It just kind of felt my relationships had got a bit strained, and so I decided to leave. And then when I said I was leaving, Craig was like, well, like, look, why don't we just do something together? We always end up together anyway. So kind of we left Bossa, and we had like no plan whatsoever. We had like £3,000 between us, so like $4,000 equivalent. We had no game. There was no like game we wanted to make in particular. We didn't even have the company name at that point. We just knew we wanted to make games together. And so that's what we did. And I went into my mum's garage. Craig went into his girlfriend's mum's spare bedroom, and we started making games. And within our first probably within like 4 or 5 weeks of like leaving and starting up what would become Dlala, I met Microsoft at Develop Conference very kindly gave me a student ticket, even though I was far from a student. Got to meet Microsoft there. I quite aggressively went up to them and asked them what they were doing there. They don't care about indies, etc. And they were very nice. They gave me the time of day. And we ended up making a Windows 8 launch title. But yeah, it was just weird because I promise you, the thought had never even crossed my mind. All my family had run their own businesses. Like my mum and dad, my dad was a truck driver and he ran kind of his own haulage firm. My uncle had his own software company, but I just never had considered it because I quite enjoyed working at Bossa, or I quite enjoyed working in general.
Now that's interesting. That's such an interesting story. Like, where did the name come from, Dlala? Would you guys decide on the branding for the studio?
So, I reckon I've got the document somewhere of all the other suggestions. One of our friends was from South Africa, and she put forward a load of Zulu words that she thought might be interesting names for the studio. And one of them was Dlala, and it was one of those things where, like, the second Craig and I heard it, we fell in love with it because on the surface, it sounds stupid. What a stupid name, Dlala, right? It just sounds like nothing. But the actual meaning behind it is it means to entertain, engage, and play. And we were like, how apt is that for us? On the surface, sounds ridiculous, but beneath that, it actually does have some meaning. And so we just fell in love with that. And that, I think, even though there was a list of 10, I think that was really the only one we ever truly considered.
So let's stay in this vicinity. So you open this studio with a partner and you launch a game for Windows 8, and then is that when you guys started to do work for? Is that where you started to work for hire process at that point?
No. So it's really weird. I always say like hard work puts you in the path of luck, but like our first year, right, was like the butterfly effect. So I got to go to Develop because Develop were willing to give me a concessions ticket. I went up and insulted Microsoft, who then gave me the time of day. We did a Windows 8 launch title, which then Windows 8 did this agreement with Develop magazine, which existed at the time, and they were going to do a paragraph on all the different Windows 8 developers. We met with the editor of Develop, meant to be doing a paragraph. We spoke for hours. We ended up being the front cover and multiple page spread in Develop magazine. That magazine then got on the desk of Lee Schuneman, who was leaving Rare to start a new studio within Microsoft, who wanted to incubate a younger studio. And it just so happens that 6 months after we formed Dlala, we moved into these swanky, super expensive Soho London offices and became the first ever internally incubated studio by what was Microsoft Game Studios and is now Xbox Game Studios. And it's all literally like, there's so many moments where you're like, if you just cut that little thread, it never happens. So yeah, so we went to Microsoft, and that was basically work for hire at that point. It was, they covered all our costs, paid us like a salary. We got to bring in some friends to like expand Dlala, including people who are still at Dlala now. And we did idea generation and then prototyping. So like we'd come up with a load of ideas. I think one of the exercises we did, we generated between what would have been 5 of us, and we did 72 ideas in one day, and then we narrowed it down and then figured out what we were going to prototype. But Microsoft owned it all. That was kind of the trade-off. Microsoft funds us, but they own everything we did at that time. That was meant to be 6 months. They extended it to 14. They approached us to extend. It was crazy. They then approached us to extend for another year, and Craig and I kind of went in the room together. And as you know, we've got a great relationship with Microsoft now. We've done Battletoads, but the year we were there, this was 2013. So this was that E3. It was the famous Xbox as a media rather than game console. So like, this was when free-to-play shifts started happening. And so Craig and I kind of sat down together, and we were like, we kind of started our own thing to do our own thing, but we kind of feel more like we're just doing Microsoft's thing. And we're like super grateful, but at the same time, like, and I said to him, I said like, this isn't for me. And Craig said the same. So like, we very kindly sat down with Microsoft. We actually negotiated for all our team members to stay on, even though we were going to leave. And then we sat the team down and we said like, hey guys, like, Microsoft didn't want to give us a year's extension, but Craig and I are going back to the garages with no money again. And we said, we've negotiated your contract so you can stay on. And they all very politely told us to F off, turn down the Microsoft contracts, and came back to the garages with us. So for the first 3 months of 2014, was it 2014? Yeah, first 3 months of 2014, Dlala was myself, Craig, Ben, who's my tech director, Chris, who's our principal game programmer, and Loudon, who was our designer and is now visual concepts. And no one got paid for 3 months. So like, everyone was like back to earning no money. We were trying to figure out what we were going to do. We built a prototype in 10 days, we built a prototype in 5 days. And then 10 weeks later, we took that to EGX, and that got signed by Team 17. And that kind of really kicked us into the work for hire thing, because while we were finishing up overall that game, we started taking on some work for hire for Team 17. So we did porting work on The Escapists and a game called Trojan's Cat. And then that went really well. So kind of we then jumped on and did some DLC for The Escapists. And this was all just to generate further income. And then that same year, we signed for the Creative Artists Agency. And then we got another introduction, and we ended up making like web-based training games for like American government branches. So like training games for like the FBI and people like this. So this tiny little studio in Essex, and we were back in the garages taking account. Like at one point, I had to fly to Germany to show off and do like an interactive seminar for this software we're making, and they were like proper like 4-star generals and stuff. And in the typical dev manner, I'd done the Bradley Cooper. I'd gone suited and booted, except for instead of the boots, I was wearing skate shoes. And yeah, so that kind of started our work for hire journey. We actually, that client we're doing the government stuff was the Institute for Creative Technologies in California. They were a client of ours for 5 years. We did multiple titles for them, and we worked with Team 17 on and off for years after that. And that kind of what is really, I think, what kickstarted us into doing both the work for hire and kind of what we call work for hire plus.
No, I know. I have a lot of game dev friends, and I'll tell you, ports will what keep the light. Porting games is what kept the light on for a lot of time in mid 2000s, and people wanted their games on PS4 or Xbox One, or Switch was a big one, right? Like that was, yeah, and that was really brutal. But it can be It's good work. It's just a
Yeah.
lot of stuff, especially like you don't want to be. I always like to say like in game dev too, like it's always changing, but it seems like it's changing faster and faster. Like as a game dev, like are you excited when that stuff happens, or are you kind of like dreading that? Oh God, I have to learn this new script or this new technique or this thing. Like because I feel like it happens so quickly now.
Yeah, I think it's as a consumer, it's super exciting, right? And even as a studio owner, it is exciting. But what's scary for us is like our projects are 3 years now, like and they're still short compared to a GTA or a Call of Duty, right?
Or yeah, Bethesda, anything Bethesda does, yeah.
Right, but like for one thing, a lot of those guys are working on their own engines, so they don't really need to worry, and they have full-size engine teams, which is a lot of work and a lot of money, but they've got both. But for us, it's terrifying because, like, we could start something and it could be out of date by the time it comes out, like So it's weird. Like we have this thing where we'll be working on a game, and especially before it announces, you just sit there and you're always checking the news for like, oh man, is a new console going to come out? Oh man, is somebody going to release a game that's got similar mechanics to this and it's going to screw us? Like, it's quite scary, especially when you're pitch black for so long on stuff. But I mean, overall, it is exciting. Like, even in the short 11 years that Dlala has been going, to see where we came from to what we can do now, that is only possible from how far the industry has been moving.
And we did talk a little bit about another interview about the 2D animation, but can you talk about like why you feel that's important to Dlala in general? And like I look at your history and like I totally see like the love for animation there, especially in the Facebook and web genre of games. You can't do high-res 3D models in browser games, right? So you do like little flash animations. Is that where like that started, and why do you feel that's so important as your identity as Dlala? Or
yeah, I mean, I can point you to a big reason why we do it, and I can actually, like, one of the biggest reasons we do it is because of this. Like, the one thing that we had very quickly from the start is that all of us in that small group love them, and it's one of the most beautiful games still to date. Those two games still hold up visually, and there was just something so appealing about, like, we grew up with Cartoon Network and, the classic shows, and we love this idea of like capturing playable cartoons very early. And it just so happened that through the coincidence of when we were incubated at Microsoft, we actually got to meet the guys who made like the original animation director. Mike Dietz is a long-term friend and collaborator now. And Eric Chacon, our animation director, his first ever job was cleaning up the line work on Earthworm Jim. And I think for me, we saw it, right? PS1 comes out, N64, and everyone moves away from 2D.
Yeah.
And then the indie game movement happens, and we kind of get this resurgence of it. And I think for me, I just think 2D is timeless. I think 3D is beautiful, but it ages. I think there's a reason you can look at Snow White and you wouldn't be able to put what year it came out, but like you look at the first Toy Story, which is incredible, and it does look dated. And so I kind of wanted to just find a way to us to keep that same magic we had when we were kids. Like, how do we keep making playable cartoons for people that feel that way? And I think that we just kind of lent into that, and we got very lucky that partners like Rare and Disney kind of agreed with us, and they kind of loved this idea of like, what does a modern 2D experience look and feel like?
Like, speaking of that too, like animation, the tools in animation have evolved. Like you said, the PSX, I do remember, like, oh, these games can look great in 2D or like in digitized sprites, and they also did to go 3D. And a game that I rented was Medal of Honor, and like that's a game that does not look good today. Like, what I mean? Just at the time, it's state of the art, right? Or Final Fantasy VII, or any of those 3D games in the mid 90s. But like the things that do look good were all the ones that were, the LucasArts games, Heart of Darkness, all the Marvel's Capcom games. All those things still look good today, all the digitized sprites. As technology in game development moves forward, I feel like animation equally moves forward. Like, what tools have evolved over these last decade that helps your team create things like Disney's Illusion Island and Battletoads?
Yeah, so I mean, a big one, it's twofold for us. So on the actual animation side, so we use a piece of software called Harmony, made by a company called Toon Boom. And what's really interesting there is Harmony almost has two flavors. Like, you could do rigged animation in Harmony, which is kind of, that like Flash inspired stuff, which is, if you look at like the cutscenes in Battletoads, we kind of did those rigged because, for doing 35, 40 minutes of sitcom looking animation, it didn't make sense that we drew every pose. But for all our game stuff, we hand draw every single frame of animation in Harmony. And it's got these little things which just make a massive difference. Like, you can name and save palettes, right? So we could, on Illusion Island, we'd have Mickey Shorts red. And so we paint everything in Mickey Shorts red. If for some reason Disney did a branding redo and they were like, you know what, Mickey Shorts are now purple, we could just change that palette and it would change on all the animations and we just have to re-export them. Now, to people using software, that probably doesn't sound like a lot. You tell Eric that, who had to hand pencil over every single animation frame and then hand pixel it on a screen, like, you know, it's an amazing time saver. And it also helps with like recolors. Like there was a couple of characters in Battletoads NPCs that were just recolors and tweaks of others. And it was just a quicker process and it still looks high quality. It didn't look cheap. So stuff like that has made a big difference. And then Unity, to be honest, you know, we've been Unity developers since we started and we built our own kind of 2D pipeline that sits on top of Unity. But the more and more that obviously Unity is advanced and kind of been helping us work hand in hand with what we're doing, that's made a massive difference. Like now with our tool set, we kind of, Eric will get his team to export a bunch of frames. We just put it in a folder, point the Unity tool at it that we've made, and it turns it into an actual Unity animation that's ready to plug in. And even the difference between our pipeline on Battletoads to Illusion Island, Chris, our principal programmer who does a lot of our tools, Chris shaved off probably a good 5+ minutes of that process per animation. So just like we're pushing ourselves to get better because the tooling's allowing to push ourselves to get better. And you compare that to the stuff that Eric, Mike and Ed were doing in the 90s and it's just a completely different ball game.
As co-founder of the studio, do you find yourself leaning more to like the business and client relations side and like away from the game design side? Or is that like, talk about that balance? Because like you do want to be creative and you do still want to be in the design process, but when you're running a company, you can kind of, you know, go to the business side of it too heavily. Is that a problem for Dlala or you specifically?
It's weird. Like, I think there's always that internal battle with me between the CEO part of me and the creative director part of me. I think part of the way I've tackled that is by putting good people here to run the studio. So like Gemma, our operations director, Gem really handles like I don't touch finances now for good reason. Like she handles all the finances, the operation. She makes sure that the lights stay on and that, you know, she's the one that keeps an eye on me if I'm overspending or anything like this. You know, she's the one that'll give me the reality checks where she's like, hey, I know you love this game, but if you spend any more of our own money on this, we're going to run out of money to pay people with. And so I think that meant like a little bit of my studio head brain can give way to the creative director. But I think that the part of me that the studio head CEO part of me that I never turn off is like, I'm just always terrified about where the next check for the next project's coming from. And what that has really meant, and that's changed recently, but what has really meant is like, on a 3-year project, we get a year in and I have to start pitching what's next. So I'm directing Illusion Island and then I'm pitching for the next project 2 years in advance. You know, it's the same with Battletoads. We agreed to do Illusion Island in 2019, a year before Battletoads came out. And I'd been pitching almost the entire time we were making Battletoads, I'd been pitching for the next project because, you know, we're not cash rich. We get very lucky. We get paid a nice amount of money to make the games, cover the costs. But, you know, once the staff are taken care of in terms of money, I always will prioritize the project. So if I need to spend a little bit of Dlala money to make a game better we're making, even though we don't necessarily massively financially benefit from that, I will do it because the quality of our product is the most important thing besides the team. So I think that's the bit that's always battling. I always have that fear of what's next. Like, you know, where's that next kind of game going to come from? What's that next project? What do we need to be doing? And at the same time, managing like, how do we make this the best thing we've ever done?
And at this point, you're not just in charge of like you and a couple mates. It's like it's your whole team is dependent on the next work. Otherwise, they're going to have to leave or do freelance stuff on the side. And I've been freelancing my whole life. It sucks. Like freelancing is rough. It does pay the bills, but it can be rough. Getting that nice full-time gig where, you know, there's always going to be that paycheck every month is very helpful.
I remember the day that Chris Rickett came to the day he officially became an employee. So he kind of came to us a month after we started. That everything changed. The first day we had an employee, everything changed because Craig and I always said like, look, you know, at the time, neither of us were married. Craig didn't have Sienna, his child. So kind of we always said like, hey, look, if we run out of money, we'll go man a cash register at a supermarket and then we'll keep doing this. Like it doesn't matter because it's just us, right? And then the second you have an employee, it all changes. And there's 38 of us now, full-timers here, and all I'm ever thinking about is like, if I don't nail the next deal, how are they going to pay their mortgages? How are they going to feed their kids? Like, we've got people here that started off living with their parents who have now bought houses and have kids. Like 11 years is a long time. And yeah, I think that's not me complaining. I know I'm very lucky to do what I do, but that stress doesn't go away. Like, it doesn't matter the fact that our games get bigger and the fact that our budgets get bigger. It doesn't change the fact that all I ever think about is like, okay, well, I'm not having so-and-so miss their mortgage payment. I'm not having, in 11 years, we've never missed a paycheck. And that's something we take pride in, because I've been at startups and they do miss paychecks. So yeah, that is the biggest battle I have, because I'd love to spend all my time just being the creative director, because that's the really, really fun part. But if I don't do the boring Excel, PowerPoint presentation, convincing people to give us money part, I don't get to do that anyway. So
we have a saying in America, and you probably heard it: "More money, more problems." That's basically That's basically as your budgets get bigger or the client gets bigger, you have to hire more people, and that's just more pressure to you and your partner, it sounds like.
Yeah, that is exactly it.
In 2023, I know you can't talk about what's next for you, but like when you go, like you're already, like you said, you're like 2 years ahead of that, looking for the next work, right? Is it something? Do you prioritize like your own ideas? Like you're trying to find studios like, hey, we got this idea, we want you to publish it, or do you go specifically for the work for hire when you're pitching to other businesses and other publishers?
Yeah, so this is, I think we like to call it work for hire plus what we do, because people are paying us to make licensed games effectively, which is still weird. I still feel weird saying licensed games, because it was such a dirty word for the better part of the last decade, right? Even though, Spider-Man has done a lot of good for that market. But like, we get paid to do the game for existing IP, but it's all us. Like, this is all, like, Illusion Island, we created the world of Monolith. We created every character that isn't the Fab Four. We redesigned the Fab Four. We wrote the story. This our script they're reading. So, like, for me as a creative director, like, every itch I have gets scratched by the stuff we do. Like, Battletoads and Illusion Island fulfilled me just as much as the idea of anything working on the original does. So, kind of where we're at now is like, if the team came to me with an awesome original idea, I of course would listen, and then we'd have a look at taking it out. But the thing we get right now is that people with cool IPs are coming to us and saying, hey, like, I saw what you did with Battletoads. I saw what you did with Illusion Island. Like, would you be interested in doing that for us with this? And they're the conversations that are kind of exciting, because if it's IP we love, then we're 100% open to it. But as long as it's the same sort of setup where it's not like, hey, this film's coming out in 8 months, can you make a game? Like, as long as it's, hey, here's a cool IP. Do you guys like this? Yeah, we love it. Okay, cool. Do you guys want to go away and come up with something you do with this well? Yeah, 100%. Like, leave it to us. Like, so yeah, that's not to say I don't think we'll ever do original stuff. I think that is very likely. We've split now. We've got 2 teams in the studio. We've still got like a big team that I'm heading up, and then Craig, my co-founder, he's got like a smaller team now that we're looking to do stuff with. But yeah, like for me, I really, really enjoy this stuff. Like, getting to work with Mickey Mouse was absolutely incredible.
No, like, and like as a studio, like if you do want to do your own project, like is Indiegogo or Kickstarter an option for you? Like, have you ever thought about utilizing a platform like that? Or are you more like aligned with the traditional way of getting funding?
It's interesting. Like, we've had friends that have kickstarted, and we've had some friends that have raised like, 10, 15 grand. And we've had some friends that raised hundreds of thousands. And they
Ukulele, right? Didn't Ukulele make like a couple $1,000,000 or something like that? It was a lot.
Ukulele, like the guys, the Earthworm Gym guys did Armor Krog, and they all tell me the same thing. They're like, it is a full-time job that has no guarantee of pay, basically. Like, and it's one of those scary things where I think if you did a Kickstarter and it was really successful, you'll probably have publishers knocking at your door to give you more funding and support it. If you do a Kickstarter and it's not successful, it then becomes very hard to take that project to a publisher, because they instantly go, well, why didn't you hit your Kickstarter goal? Like, is there no audience for this? And it's never that simple. It's never that clean. Like, just because a game didn't get funded on Kickstarter doesn't mean there isn't an audience. So I've always been a little bit scared. I mean, I absolutely love what that platform did. I'm a massive Double Fine fan. So, like, seeing, obviously, Double Fine Adventure, which was Broken Age, and Psychonauts 2 coming out through crowdfunding was brilliant. But, yeah, I think for us, we've always kind of played it safe, as it were, by going like the traditional publisher route.
That's not the first time I've heard that, dude. I've had several people tell me that a lot of Kickstarters to prove to the publisher that there's interest, and then they refill the extra funding.
Yeah.
Like the game could cost, I'm just throwing out random numbers, $10 million, but it kickstarted $1 million, then they'll fund the other thing because they show you that there's an audience for it. It's almost like a marketing thing. Not all the time, just sometimes it is.
No, it's 100% like exactly what you said. Sometimes it isn't. It is just for the funding, but like everyone I speak to that still does it has said to me they view it as a marketing tool rather than like. They always will ask for a fraction of their budget just to say they hit their target, and then it will make conversations easier with the publisher.
You mentioned you do have like kind of a producer production role that keeps you on track, but you know, as a design director and CEO, you do want to like you said, we talked in our early interview about you how like you want to have all these ideas and you want to do them all, right? But like you only have like a good example. I love using rocks, right? You only have the budget for 9 rocks, but you want 50 rocks. But we don't need 50 rocks. You can just do the 9 rocks. Like talk about that battle all the time where like you want to do all these things, but there's only so much time, resources, and money, the pyramid triangle in a day to do them.
When the creative director is the CEO and he ignores his production, that's when you get a Battletoads, when you get 14 genres crammed into about 10 months of production and a very overworked and stressed out team. So yeah, that is something I've been working on myself for a long time. I saw like an Ubisoft documentary, I think it was. It might have been For Honor's one. And like the head of production was with the creative director. And they did like man mumps in lollipop sticks from like ice creams. And they stuck them on the wall. And the creative director came in and he was like, okay, I want to change this. I want to add this feature, do this. And they said, okay, we'll take some lollipop sticks from somewhere. And he went, what? And she went, if you want to add more lollipop sticks to that, you need to take them from somewhere because we can't just make more lollipop sticks. And that has given me nightmares for years because that is just too real. And so I made the mistake of telling my production that. So now my production is very clear to me. Like at the end of pre-production on Illusion Island, my producer Vic drew on the wall, this is how long a biome is going to take. We know this because we've mapped it all out. This is how much time you have. This is what happens if you do 5 biomes like you want. So what's going? And I was like, this is the worst meeting of my life.
But I want it all. I don't want to get rid of anything.
I do. Yeah. And you do. Of course you want it all. And like, I think what we say here is almost like, I want 20. We've got time for 15. So we'll do 16 and a half. We're always going to do a little bit more than we've got time for, and not at the cost of the staff anymore. Like this isn't a thing about like, let's crunch to get that in. It's more just a case of let's figure out how we fit 16 and a half into 15. But I think part of that is healthy. I think if you're just trying to always just fit it into your, like you're always playing it safe, I think you never make something great, you make something good. And I'm not encouraging crunch because crunch is horrific, and I'm not encouraging overworking staff because it's our team come first. But I think that my job is to always be pushing. My job is to always be saying, I want more, I want more. And it's production's job to always be pushing back and protecting the team, the project, and even myself from myself. Like it's their job to basically be going, look, you know, you can keep pushing this, but eventually we're going to get to a point where you have to sacrifice something else. And I'm like, that's future AJ's problem. Let future AJ handle that.
No, yeah, and it's funny too, because even the huge AAA studios that have multi-million-dollar budgets, like even they cut stuff out. I mean, I remember Todd Howard mentioning that there was like a mini game in one of the Fallouts where it was a surgery game, and it was just cut. And people were like, where is that? We wanted that in the game, but like that game had to have a $200 million budget. You know what I mean? They still cut stuff, you know. And it's, I think as you go down the totem pole, it just gets harder because you're smaller. Yeah. You know, less.
And yeah, I think that like, I think you're always trying to do more than your means for good reasons. Like, I'm not saying there's not bad reasons that people do it, but we just want stuff to be awesome for everyone and for us. And I think it's hard because when you think of ideas and you think of cool stuff, you don't instantly know the scope of that. Like, and so often what that means is you have to do investigation or pre-production, and then there might be something you put all your heart into and you find out you haven't got the time to do it. And it's such a hard decision. Like cutting down to 3 biomes was reasonably easy, to be honest, because of what happened on Battletoads. Battletoads had gone so bad for us at the end because I'd crammed too much in that I was quite paranoid. And so when production were like, you can't do this, you can fit in 3 at most, I was like, okay, I was just like, cut it. Just cut down, we'll go down to 3. I'll find somewhere else that I can start pushing out the sides. Like, let's just do this because I don't want this to just be a continuation of Battletoads. But that didn't mean that by the end of Illusion Island, I wasn't trying to squeeze things in here and there. Like, we'd be in like, we'd feature lock, and feature lock had been and gone. and we were just doing fixes and optimization, and I'd see something and I'd like call up Ben, our tech director, and I'd be like, yeah, like maybe I could add this here, and he'd be like, that's not an optimization, that's you're adding something to the game, AJ, like you can't do that, we're feature locked.
No, it's fine.
Like,
see, we're gonna do this. Yeah, well, let's move this around. Right? You're trying to like sell them on like how you can fit it in.
And he's just having none. I mean, he's worked with me for 11 years. He's having none of it. Like before he even answers the call, he knows what I'm going to be asking. So
how does, when you work with IP like Battletoads or even Disney, like it sounds to me that they're very hands off in terms of like design. Do they just kind of give you the thumbs up, thumbs down when you show them stuff? Like when you show them your milestones and stuff like that? Is that how that works? We can do Illusion Island because that's more recent.
Yeah, sure. And they were both different. Illusion Island, we actually did it really collaboratively. So like, yeah, we're driving design. Design's our thing. But what we would do is once a fortnight and occasionally once a week, we just have a catch up with our design liaison, and we'd be like, have a look at this cool stuff we've been doing. And if there was any potential issues IP wise, they could flag it then. Or if they had any faults, they could raise them. But really, it was never like, we have official milestones, but kind of our way of working is that if the first time our partner is seeing something is in a milestone, that's a failure on our part. Like, we like to make sure that our partners have seen everything in the build up to a milestone already, so that they have no surprises. So yeah, we just touched base regularly and chatted, and it was just nice. Like, it's healthy for us to get voices that aren't our voices in the room, get their thoughts on stuff. We'd send them over prototype builds to play. So like, every area of Illusion Island was playable white block, and then was also playable like sketched before it was coloured. So they were playing all the iterations and giving us their thoughts and feedback, but it wasn't directive. It wasn't like they would ever be like, we don't like this, so change it. It'd be like we had 10 people play it, and we found that 4 of them had this issue here, and then we'd be like, well, that's super interesting because some of the less experienced players at the team had the same issue, and then that would kind of give us hotspots. So yeah, while we were driving it, it was completely our design. It was priceless having those kind of conversations with Disney regularly.
And then you said it was slightly different with Battletoads. Like, how was that process? Because now I'm curious.
Yeah, so Battletoads was, I mean, you have to remember as well, with Battletoads, like Rare was working as publisher. That wasn't common. Like, Rare hadn't published a game before. Nobody had touched the Battletoads IP in like 26 years. So we had kind of like Paul Cunningham, who's one of my favorite people in the world, was like our external partnership manager, like our external producer. So like, I talked to Paul every day. We had another design. We had like a designer on Rare side who would just check in, but that was really more traditional. Like, we'd send them stuff, then it would get to the milestone, and then we'd maybe get some feedback. Every now and then the designer would come stay down with us for a week, and we'd chat through stuff. But it wasn't quite as like it wasn't like that regular weekly kind of check-ins that we did with Disney. And that's not to say that it was worse. It was just different. Like, it was a very different approach to the project. And I think part of the reason we did what we did with Disney was because we felt like we would have benefited from that on Battletoads. And if we told Rare we wanted it, Rare would 100% have done it. Like, it wasn't a Rare like letting us down thing. It was an us thing. Like, I have traditionally been very defensive when it comes to feedback, and I've been working on that for, 38 and 3/4 years that I've been alive. And I think that like, once I got more accepting of that, and also gave more onus to my team to do their own meetings, that's why Illusion Island went a bit smooth. Rare was fantastic to us through Battletoads, but I definitely don't think we utilised working with them as well as we could have.
It's a learning process. You always like, you learn. There's another great quote. We've been saying great quotes all this interview, but like, you learn nothing by winning, right? That's a good. Yeah. I think that's a good quote too. Like,
that's a perfect quote. Yeah, that is. Yeah, and it's spot on. Like, I arguably learned more from the shortcomings and the failures I made on Battletoads than I have from any of the successes I've ever had.
What's like a dream IP you and your studio would want to work with? I mean, you did show me a Sega Genesis case. I know Interplay owns Earthworm Jim. I mean, like,
yeah, God, it's funny. I've been asked this question before, and it's a conversation we have internally yearly, and still I find it hard to answer. Look, Disney have got a lot of them, let's be honest. Like, we'd love to do something with the Ducks. We'd love to do something with Star Wars, like, the obvious ones, like the stuff like that. But yeah, and obviously, like, we're cartoon fans, I'm technically on the Disney campaign here, but like, we love Looney Tunes. Like, I think you can see a lot of Looney Tunes stuff in our like inspirations in our work as well. So getting to work with something like Bugs or Animaniacs. And then yeah, like, we've kind of looked at all ends of the spectrum. We've looked at some really younger skewing stuff, and then we've also looked at like Spawn, Todd McFarlane's Spawn.
Right.
Stuff that would probably be quite shocking for people if we did. But yeah, like it's hard to say. It's really hard to say. But there's a lot. There's a lot of cool IP out there. Disney own most of it that we'd kind of love to play with. Yeah, the ducks are a big one. All the inhabitants of Duckburg, I think. You know, whether that's DuckTales, Donald, Darkwing, I think we'd love to do something in that world.
God, I would love for you to do. There was a really bad '90s Mighty Duck show, but it was like such a cool concept. Do you remember that show? And it was
the cartoon.
They were aliens that came down and played hockey. I was like, can we get a game of that? Like, how odd and cool would that be? The kids be like, what is this? You know what I mean?
We were talking the other day here about like Turtles obviously kicked off the big whole anthropomorphic animals thing, and there were just so many. Obviously, we had the obvious ones, and we had like Samurai Pizza Cats. Do you remember Samurai?
Yes, I remember Samurai Pizza Cats. Yes.
Like, and it was just all these anthropomorphic animals, and yeah, and obviously Battletoads was really a Turtles ripoff to start with. You know, I'm sure Rare won't mind me saying too much.
But there were 3. Not 4.
Exactly.
That's the difference.
Exactly. And they were crude dudes. You know, the Turtles weren't quite as crude as the Battletoads were. But yeah, like there's Biker Mice from Mars, all that kind of.
Oh God, 90s. All those toy commercials. Yes, dude. We're the same age. You grew up in the era of animation. I've seen it all. I loved animation as a kid. All of it. Yeah,
that's it. So yeah, like I think there's stuff we'd love to do with modern IP. There's stuff we'd love to do with kind of harking back to that era as well.
Can we bring back Goof Troop? Let's bring back that. Let's make a game with just Goof Troop. Put that theme song alone.
I know who to call for that. I'll get the phone out. I know who to call for that one.
So my last question for you, AJ, is, you know, you guys are big Earthworm Jim's fans. Have you reached out to Interplay? Because Interplay still owns the rights, but I feel like they don't do anything with that game, or they've tried, and it's been kind of Sonic-y, right? It's been dragged through the mud in like the mid or early 2000s, so like no one touches it anymore. But have you reached out to them? Like, what's going on?
So really, like, it's been long enough that I think I can talk about this. We did years ago. So I think we're going back, I want to say 2016, maybe 2016, 2017. We had a pitch called Project Earth Eater, we called it internally. We have the worst code names, honestly. Like, all our partners make us change our code names because, like, Illusion Island's code name at one point was Illusions, like, and they were just like, that's not going to be a code name for anything. So yeah, we did reach out. We had quite in-depth conversations. We had a full pitch on what we would do with the IP, and it was just one of those things that didn't end up working out. Yeah, and I think now, like, with pitching, like, we've done so many pitches over the 11 years, you almost have to let your heart move on a little bit. And kind of, that's really, to be honest, what happened with Mickey. We kind of never expected we'd be coming back to do a project with Disney, let alone Mickey. And we'd almost moved on from it then. And I think that's kind of what happened with us with Jim. I think, like, we were resided in the fact that this wasn't going to happen, and it probably meant it would never happen for us. So yeah, like, but yeah, those first 2 Earthworm Jim games, they're just, they are still so good.
I think that's the downside of working with other people's IPs. You can't just make a game, right? Like, I feel like the same with like ukulele, right? Like, it's all the banjo devs. You know, a lot of the banjo devs were working on that, and I could feel like, but they had to do a new thing because Rare was like, you can't use that, and that's not bad or anything. It's just they own it, and they get to decide who uses it and how it's represented.
Yeah, definitely, and it's really interesting, right? It's like with a lot of that 90s IP, the fear I have as well is like how much of it is. Like, they were great. There's no doubt in, like, a Banjo-Kazooie is amazing. How easy would it be to do a Banjo-free, right? Because they did an awesome game in Nuts and Bolts, and they made it different because that's what really we should be doing. You know, it's the same reason we did a Metroidvania instead of a straight platformer.
Right.
But do you alienate the existing fan base and also capture enough of the new fan base? And it's, you know, I mean, our Battletoads is a great example. Look at the reviews for that and how divisive it is. I think that we did quite a good job with our Battletoads of capturing a new audience, but we really, really made that old audience angry. And I think kind of that's what's hard with those old IPs. And, you know, I did a talk to a friend's studio on Friday, and I said one of the biggest things you have to remind yourself when you're doing things with someone else's IP is like, am I telling the story and making the game that's right for the characters in the universe? Or am I trying to make a game I want to make and plugging these characters in? Because I think the best licensed stuff is the stuff where it's all cohesive, right? And it is, I'm making this game for these characters. And I think the worst stuff is like, I've slapped this IP on top of an idea I wanted to make. So I think that that's almost the challenge we're permanently in with ourselves. And I had it with Mickey for what it's worth. Like at one point on Illusion Island, the story was a lot darker than it ended up being. And Disney was so great with me, and they helped talk me through it. And like in the end, it became clear to me. I was like, man, like I'm just trying to tell this story. Like this isn't. I'm not trying to tell the Mickey story. I'm just trying to tell this story I've got in my head. And so like made some tweaks, made it more Mickey, and it was 10 times better for it. But I've just been super aware of that ever since.
Yeah, it's funny in the Battletoads thing. Like, I wasn't angry. I just wanted more beat 'em up stuff. Like every time I was doing the beat, I'm like, this is great. And then like anytime I wasn't, I was like, I wanted more beat 'em up stuff. That was the only criticism I had. Really, I really liked it. I played through the whole game. I enjoyed it. I just wanted more beat 'em up.
And like that's great for us. Like I'm super proud of the whole game. I'm super proud of the beat 'em up stuff because we'd never made one. Like we'd never done a fighting game, and like a big thing for us going into that was like. We don't want to make it like a 90s side scroller because there are people that can do that better than us. So we were like, wouldn't it be interesting to try and like, what combat games do we like? Oh man, we love Devil May Cry and Bayonet. Okay, well, like that's all about fluidity and just everlasting combos. Like, how can we translate that into like Battletoads? And I'm really, really happy with how the combat came out. And for what it's worth, like, I don't disagree with a lot of the criticism of the game at all. And I think like, should the day ever come where we do a second one for that, like we do another one, I think we'd have a lot more combat in it. We'd still have a lot of the weird stuff, believe me. That's part and parcel of Dlala. We'd still have a lot of the weird stuff, but I think we'd do more combat.
How did 2020 and Stay at Home affect Illusion Island and Battletoads, or if at all? Like, did that can throw a rock in all this stuff as a CEO?
Yeah, it was interesting. So we had to do the last bit of Battletoads and the first bit of Illusion Island in lockdown. And I would argue that they're two of the hardest bits to do as a, like, if you've never worked remote, they're two of the hardest bits to do in that position. Like you're finalizing your certification stuff, you're polishing, and then your pre-production. We went into lockdown straight as soon as I think the second state or second city in America went into lockdown. We just went into lockdown, and our operations and IT team were absolute just miracle workers. We bought identical setup, so everyone had a replica of their setup, and IT packed everything up, drove it around to everyone's houses, unloaded it, safe distanced. And so I think we sent everyone to lockdown on the Monday. I think we were back up and running by the end of Tuesday. So like we had instant kind of transition. Battletoads was difficult. We'd never heard of Parsec at that point, so we couldn't do any kind of multiplayer like debugging. So what would be happening would be that we'd work all day on a load of like cooperative stuff and features, and then myself and Mark, who was in my I can't remember what they're called, circle, whatever it is, my best friend who's also my IT director, we'd come in at like 3 a.m. in the morning to the office, and we'd test game builds that we were going to send off for certification. And we did that over and over again. So finishing BT was really hard. And then with Illusion Island, it was just weird because I've never liked remote. Like, we are fully hybrid now. People work where they want. But prior to the lockdown, we were in the office every day. I didn't ever do remote. So we had to figure out, like, how do we capture that creativity? How do we capture the bouncing off each other? And, you know, we were very lucky. We all, you know, we kept funded. We kept our jobs. We made sure the studio light stayed on. No one took pay cuts. It was all covered. But we had to figure out a whole new way of kind of working and being. And yeah, it was just weird. Like, you know, we formed from two guys in a garage who were just always around each other. And that's kind of how we'd always stayed. And suddenly we were put into this position where none of that existed. We were all just the other side of a screen. And we knew that didn't work for us because after Microsoft, when we left Microsoft incubation, we had to do the remote thing for a while and we hated it. But the team smashed it on this. Like, the team were just incredible. We had no loss of productivity. Like, the team were just brilliant. And I think that it was how good the team was that made me be like, okay, I need to get better. The team are great. They're handling this. I need to get better at A, doing this, and B, accepting that after this, if my team need to be remote, they need to be remote. And I can't be selfish about it.
Now, in the same lieu, did Brexit affect this business at all, or was you just kind of business as usual and like that was more political end?
Yeah, so Brexit didn't really have, well, I'm sure there were cost effects that we've had that Gemma could talk about, but
right.
Like it didn't affect our day to day. Like anyone we had who was in Europe, for instance, was already a contractor. Anyone we had on visas, the visas were already covered, and then we didn't have anyone in the studio who then needed a visa because of it. I think now it'd make it hard, like if we tried to hire talent, like I think it adds another level of complexity and more costs, to a small business. But yeah, like luckily for us, because our clients tend to be US based, we didn't feel the full brunt of it. Whereas I know I've got friends whose studios had European publishers and it caused them all sorts of headaches.
This is most of your clients are US based. Does that mean that like you kind of when you leave the office, you kind of send them the email with a build and then like you come in the next morning with notes? Does that work really well for you? Or is it more like you have to be up at 3 a.m., when their day starts to talk to them for a little bit? Because you're like 8.5 hours ahead, I believe. So it's the end of the day for you, beginning of the day for me.
I don't have to be up, but I am. Like I don't sleep a lot anyway. I'm a workaholic. So I'm often keeping like a double day anyway. And it's not like, believe me, the amount of time Disney will tell me off for being on Slack at like 3 o'clock in the morning my time, and they're like, just go to bed. But like I have weird sleep patterns anyway, where like I'll go to bed quite early, sleep for a couple of hours, get up and do a couple of hours work on my phone, sleep for a couple of hours. But yeah, like I've actually always loved, like we've got friends who are working with us at the moment in the States, and I love the 24-hour cycle. Like I think that's so exciting how like I go to bed, well, the team go to bed, and when they wake up, there's new stuff. And the fact that the game's just being worked on around the clock, like that, I think that's really cool. And I think like, how awesome is that in this day and age, it's so easy to do that. But yeah, like I tend to keep very strange hours.
In the future for your studio, are we gonna expect this like 2D style to be kind of like your stamp, like your voice? Like, will we see more 2D animation projects in the style of Battletoads or Disney Illusion Island moving forward with you?
I definitely think there will always be 2D stuff coming out of Dlala. I think that doesn't mean there will only be 2D stuff. And part of the reason we've now moved to multi-project is to try and keep that part of Dlala alive and also give us the freedom to explore other avenues. But I have no intention, like, I still want to make cool 2D stuff. I still want our studio to be producing modern 2D games. So, yeah, I think that we can transfer that Dlala style to 3D and keep it Dlala. But I think I'd almost be being a traitor to myself if I didn't keep us doing some 2D stuff at the same time.
So my last question is, because I know this is a tricky one because you're probably working on a lot of stuff you can't talk about, but what's next for Dlala and you personally? Like what's going on? You guys take a little break now with Illusion Island? Are you going to make DLC for that? Are we going to move on to a new project? Like what will we see coming out of your studio and your team next?
Yeah, as you can imagine, some of my answer to this is NDA'd. But what I will say is like, now that we've done the 2 split, like one project is like 6 months in already, like in that exciting pre-production phase. I don't know when we'll talk more about it. I don't know when pre-production will even end. Like some really exciting stuff going on there, which is, you can definitely see the influence of what we've done before, but it's still different. And then we've got this kind of new exciting team, which Craig is helming. Right now, they're doing some cool little quality of life stuff for Illusion Island as well. So like, we love that game. And I did not want to leave that game. I tell you now, like, I could have worked on Illusion Island for the rest of my life. But like, it was a great opportunity for us to have, when we've got people like Craig who are ready to kind of move into leadership roles. It's hard when I'm still creative directing because that space doesn't open. So they're doing some really wicked stuff to kind of keep the quality of life up for that. We're looking at, like, a good example is we had a player message us the other day and he was playing with the SNES controller and we completely forgot that existed. And so he couldn't move the cursor around the map. So that's instantly then something we put into like our investigation of like, okay, well, can we move the cursor around the map with the D-pad so we can get this working for them? So, we're definitely looking to keep that quality up for Illusion Island, and Craig's team's going to carry on doing that and trying out some stuff for that.
If people want to reach out to you or like look at your studio and your games, like where can they go? Like your Discord, forum, website? Yeah,
so we're on Twitter, twitter.com/Dlala Studios. I'm twitter.com/Dnost, DNOST. Obviously, DlalaStudios.com is up. Should be getting a nice revamp very shortly. For any official updates on the game, the Disney Games channel, so the Disney Games Social or Disney.com games. And yeah, obviously the big thing is Illusion Island is out there now, so please do pick it up, either digital or physical on the Nintendo Switch.